Hey people, it is Saturday, December the 9th. Time is 3:22 in the afternoon and it's a very balmy 12 degrees Celsius. I'm on the corner of Yonge Street and Maitland Street. And I'm going to be walking east along Maitland Street down to Mutual Street and then south along the full length of Mutual Street. And I can see a protest making its way north up Yonge Street right now. They seem very displeased with Prime Minister Trudeau. But I thought I would also, as I'm walking along through some of these residential streets here in the downtown area, I would sort of keep an eye out for what has been popularly referred to as the missing middle in recent years. Lots of urbanist videos tend to go on about how cities need to build more missing middle housing, especially Toronto gets singled out quite a bit for that. I think the narrative is that Toronto is made up of mostly either single detached houses or very tall high-rise condominiums. But we'll see how true that is in the central area of Old Toronto here as I walk through these residential areas. I think we'll find that almost all of the housing in the older parts of Toronto is actually made up of missing middle housing. Now, obviously, we can see lots of high-rise condominiums here. We are in the heart of downtown Toronto, so it makes sense to have high density in an area of the city such as this. And a new building is just getting underway right here. I believe this will be about a 40-story residential tower. But right across the street, you can see we have here an old apartment building. 3-story apartment building. Definitely qualifies as missing middle. And a couple of nice old walk-up apartments here. This seems to be a commercial building now. Looks like at one time it was either a big mansion or possibly a small apartment building. And lots of 1960s era high-rise apartments here also. But these buildings are a perfect example of the missing middle, about 4 stories. I think anything above 4 stories is considered mid-rise and isn't really considered missing middle in the strictest sense. I think missing middle refers to anything more dense than a single detached home, but less dense than a mid-rise or high-rise. So we're talking about semi-detached houses, row houses, townhouses, duplexes, and low-rise walk-up apartment buildings.
Where I go this early?
Some more beautiful low-rise apartment buildings right here. This part of the city is full of this sort of stuff, really, as is much of the core parts of Old Toronto. Basically, everything that was built up in the late 19th century to early 20th century. Tends to be rather dense in nature. It's once you get a little further out away from downtown that you start to see the fully detached houses. But in many neighborhoods of Old Toronto, the fully detached neighborhoods are rather dense themselves, with the houses almost touching one another in many cases, with very small yards, often no driveways. Looking south down Church Street, in the Church Wellesley Village. Another beautiful old apartment building. I think these used to be homes once upon a time. Now they're businesses, but you can see how these are actually attached together. And a classic Victorian Bay and Gables semi-detached house here. And once again, these at first glance might look like detached houses, but they're actually not. They're all attached together, including the ones right beside here. So this is not exactly a semi-detached house. It is, but it's built right up against the one next door, although that looks like it was a recent addition joining these two together. But these two were definitely built in that fashion. Another old apartment building. That one looks like it's not occupied. It seems to be boarded up. I'm not sure what the story is behind that. I don't see any redevelopment notices on the site. And interspersed are many of these 1960s era high-rise apartment buildings. So Maitland Street continues on here for a few more blocks, but the housing typology remains much the same along the rest of its length. Let's start heading south down Mutual Street. This is sort of an interesting residential street. It goes for a fair distance on the east side of downtown here, between two major streets. And we'll see quite a mix of different housing styles along here. That one seems to be semi-detached. They really made an effort to make one side different from the other. And two more houses joined together, as well as there. Here's an older mid-rise apartment building. And more of the Church Wellesley high-density apartments off in that direction. This looks like a more modern build here, but keeping with the theme of the neighborhood. It's rather nice townhouses, two semi-detached towns side by side. And all of these houses are attached together. This is all most definitely missing middle housing right here. Here are some townhomes fronting the street as part of this high-rise residential building. That's a more recent build, I think around 15 to 20 years old. And another phase here of the same development. More apartments over here. And some more recent high-rise condos built less than 10 years ago. Looking west down towards the old Maple Leaf Gardens. And here's a neighborhood school. I believe it's a Francophone school. And we're getting close to Carlton Street, so things densify quite a bit here on the main street with taller buildings, most of them residential. Now, that across the street, I think, was a mansion at one time, but it's now operating as a business, a very special business. We'll get a closer look at that once I cross the street. And here's Carlton Street. I don't know if I can just jump across before things start moving. Looking east down Carlton. Mutual Street continues on here. So yeah, I think this was a mansion at one time. I think over the years it was divided up into apartments. It now serves as a sex club called the Oasis Aqua Lounge. And no, I wasn't kidding. Kind of glare on the sign there, but maybe you can read that. More townhomes over here. And a brand new under construction high-rise residential tower going up here. It's still going to get quite a bit taller before that one's topped out. Got more dense attached housing here. I don't think I've seen a actual fully detached house yet on this walk, unless you consider the one-time possible mansion that is now Oasis Aqua Lounge. And some more relatively modern townhomes here. I'd like to see what these replaced. I imagine they were old Victorian homes. And more old attached housing here. Townhomes once again. And everything here is also attached, or semi-detached, attached to another semi-detached, attached to another semi-detached. Is that a row or just a bunch of attached semi-detached? In any case, still qualifies as missing middle. And this was a lovely old townhome here that is currently boarded up, but it's awaiting to eventually be incorporated into a new residential development, so this won't be demolished. It'll be preserved and rejuvenated when that new development gets underway. That'll be a development consisting of high-rise residential towers on this site here, heading over to Jarvis Street, and a couple of old former mansions that are also boarded up on Jarvis will also be incorporated into that development. And here's Gerrard Street. Gerrard Street is annoyingly busy at most times of the day. And Mutual Street continues. So we're entering the Toronto Metropolitan University campus here. So there's lots of student housing and other apartment buildings. But still no fully detached houses in sight. And we have more new high-rise condos. This is an office building here, now part of the Ontario government, I believe. Originally it was a private sector building. And the old Sears merchandise warehouse, now converted to lofts. And the location of my neighborhood grocery store. Trying to not walk under the scaffolding here, while also not getting in the way of traffic. Luckily, this street is not terribly busy with automobile traffic. Such a massive building, the old merchandise building there. And over towards Dundas and Jarvis. Tons of new high-rise residential. And this large parking lot here is also slated to be redeveloped with a new building as part of Toronto Metropolitan University. Things around here are fairly high density, not really much in the way of any more missing middle housing. I think there are a few more examples just a bit further south along Mutual Street. Approaching Dundas. I think this might be my chance to cross. Here are some very new buildings. These ones were just completed within the last couple of years, and that one is actually still under construction next door, just wrapping up construction. I think these apartments are on the site of what once was a sports arena. And this park is now named after that one-time arena, Marina Gardens. Now could that qualify as a one-time detached house? It's a business now. I think once upon a time it was attached to another one over on this side, which was demolished, leaving that one standing alone because they weren't typically built in that fashion as fully detached houses, more often as semi-detached or a row, and oftentimes several segments of the row would be demolished over the years, leaving just one left standing by itself. Likewise on this side, this new building tore down some old homes which were attached to this one. I remember them actually. And I'm not saying there aren't any fully detached houses in the core of Toronto. There are some if you really look for them, but it's certainly not typical. It's quite rare actually in the oldest parts of the city. Oftentimes they were on streets that were considered a bit more upscale for the wealthy, whereas the next street over could be completely different in nature, more dense. And some more nice old attached homes here. That apartment building was built later, obviously, but it was still built right up against the old homes here. And this one is also touching the old homes.
Over there.
And those beautiful old homes across the street were completely demolished and rebuilt as the base of this new tower here. And they did a great job. They look almost exactly as they used to look. Those are old 19th century townhomes. So I'm glad those were preserved in some sense. Obviously, they're not exactly as they were. They're basically just a facade, cleverly disguised as fully intact buildings. And there's another example just a bit further up Shooter Street here, where they did the same thing with another building. Mutual Street is quite an interesting street, as I already mentioned. And this is a huge new development here rising on what was once a big surface parking lot that obviously replace some older buildings that once stood on the site many decades ago, but that surface parking lot was there for a very long time itself. I think many people in Toronto forgot all about the buildings that once stood on the site of the parking lot, but now that parking lot is home to a massive new residential complex here, which is still under construction. There'll also be some commercial and retail incorporated into this development here. And right here, some more beautiful old historic townhomes. And a big new tower also rising on this corner. You can see how they've reinforced the facades of these old historic commercial buildings. On Mutual Street and also on Queen Street. So these facades will be incorporated into that new tower. That's referred to as Facadism, and it has a lot of detractors and critics, but I'd rather have the facades of the old buildings remaining than them being completely erased. And in Toronto, they've kind of perfected it, and oftentimes it looks very convincing, as you saw over on Shooter Street. There's the facades on Queen Street. And these are commercial buildings, although there is residential on the upper floors of many of these old commercial buildings. So you could say those qualify as missing middle in those cases. Many of the old storefronts along streets such as Queen, and College, and Bloor, where there's long stretches of commercial storefronts. Most of them have one or two or sometimes three floors of residential above the retail. Like this one, for instance, definitely has residential above the downtown camera. Right, I think I'm going to make my way north up Dalhousie Street, back to that neighborhood grocery store I passed by earlier. Get a look at the other side of this development. These are the backsides of commercial buildings fronting onto Church Street, so not the most attractive streetscape here on this side. Another tower rising off to the south. know if there are apartments in the upper floors of these old buildings. There probably are in some of them. These ones don't seem to be apartments, but I might be wrong. And here's a little neighborhood pocket park. I'm sure this will be put to very good use once all the new residents are inhabiting these buildings. It'll probably be overrun with people taking their dogs out to do their business. And we're back at Shooter Street. Here's the other example I was talking about, where they reconstructed an old 19th century townhome as part of this new building. So that was also completely torn down and rebuilt, just like the ones right up there. I don't think there's any more missing middle housing along this part of Dalhousie. It's all very high density residential towers and older high-rise apartment buildings. That building is turning out quite well. I prefer the look of residential towers without the balconies being too obvious. I like when the balconies are hidden or even non-existent, although people like balconies, I understand that, but I find they tend to make the buildings look too busy, and sometimes they try to incorporate unique designs into the balconies, such as this case right here, which can look neat sometimes. But a nice smooth facade without balconies always looks better to me, such as this building. Not sure what this is. It looks like an apartment. It has 4 units, so it is one last example of missing middle housing here on this walk around the east side of downtown. So I hope you enjoyed. I'm almost back up to Dundas again, and the grocery store is just right up ahead. I'm going to start wrapping it up now, so leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about Toronto's missing middle housing here in the core of the city. It's not non-existent as some people might lead you to believe. And as I've said, much of the oldest parts of Toronto are just like what I've shown you here. Plenty of attached housing, row houses, low-rise apartments, semi-detached. All of the above, you get the drill. Alright, I'm going to try to cross the street. So be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And also be sure to hit that notification bell. That way you won't miss any of my videos. If you'd like to support the channel, there are links in the description where you can do so via PayPal, as well as via my merch store. And there's also a super thanks button right down below if you'd like to support the channel that way. And you can also become a channel member. So thanks for watching, and be sure to keep checking back, because as always, I will continue.